Today on With the First Pick, we're talking our favorite draft comps for the 2025 class. And later, we're going to play a little game called Finding the Next, where you guessed it, try to find the next standout rookies from this class, whether it's the next Bo Nix or Brock Powers or Jared Verse. So hang around for that. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Rand Carthon. This is episode 244. Make a note, people. We have 13 days to the 2025 NFL draft. Rand, I don't have the counter updated behind me because Debo threw us a curveball. Debo's producing. So we'll just have to imagine what 13 looks like. How are you doing this fine day?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Rocking my Dreamville hoodie, in honor of the last Dreamville Fest they just had in North Carolina over the weekend. So great day, man. Looking forward to getting this show going.
North Carolina, home of Ryan Wilson, as everyone knows, and the 1982 UNC Tar Heel national champions. Debo, you may have heard Penn State did not win the national title. Rand's Florida Gators did win the national title. I thought he was going to celebrate all week, but he's already moved on.
No, I thought about it, but then I wanted to show you love with the Dreamville
Thank you.
hoodie. So,
and,
still got my Gator back there.
As long as we're repping, I'm repping the Ball Until Bees, the high school team that, as you know, Rand, when they have school fundraisers, you got to buy a lot of gear. So this, I bought a couple football helmets, I think, with all the stuff I bought. All right, let's get to it. Start with draft comps. And Rand, I went back and looked at draft comps that we did last year just to get a sense for how good or bad I was. And our buddy Rick Spillman will tell you that I was very bad. And this isn't bad. My draft. We'll do this quickly before we move on to 2025. My draft comp for Drake May. You give the grades, A through F. Justin Herbert.
I give you a B.
Okay, you can be as harsh as you want. Let's see. My draft comp for, and Debo spoiled this one. I'll do this one. This one's a good one. My draft comp for Ladd McConkey, who I was really high on last year. Emmanuel Sanders.
Give you another B. B plus. B plus. B
Okay,
plus.
he liked that one a little better, Debo. And then finally, do I want to name another one?
Go ahead and get your A.
I'll do this one, and this way I can push it off because this was a B-Max comp for this player. So B-Max comp, which I stole for Cooper DeJean, Debo's guy for Philadelphia, Antrell Roll.
I give you an A on that one. I can see the position versatility, movement skills, ball skills. I can see it.
All right. B-Mac is the A, and I get what sounds like a C, but that's okay. Averages out to a B. We're going to take it. All right. Let's talk draft comps in this class, and we're going to start with a guy that we somehow haven't spent a lot of time talking about, Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama. Part of me, Rand, wanted him to come back for another year just to see what that would look like with Kalen DeBoer, because we saw what Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix Jr. were able to do together at Washington, and it ended up with Michael Penix Jr. going from, well, he was considered a much more athletic quarterback at Indiana to a guy who was a pocket passer who could absolutely spin it by the time he left Washington. Jalen Milroe was, for being honest, up and down at Alabama this year. The game against Georgia was lights out, and then there were moments where you wanted to see a little bit more consistency, especially on those second-level throws. But let's start here. What is your comp for Jalen Milroe? And let's have a conversation about where he may end up going once the draft happens.
So here I went kind of two comps. So if we're looking at Milroe as just a pure quarterback, my comp for him was Malik Willis. And if you're looking for a comp for a guy that's so dynamic, so explosive with the ball in his hands, I went with Taysom Hill. And we can get into that, a little bit, if you want, on how we can justify both of those.
Absolutely. So let's start with that. So here's the thing. Jalen Milroe, for me, if you're talking about a pure pocket passer and stacking him in this draft class, I have those concerns, but the athleticism is what jumps out at you. And we were talking to a couple of the Texas A&M edge rushers, Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, and they both said to a person that Jalen was the toughest quarterback they faced, in part because of his ability with the ball in his hands to run. I mentioned it to Jalen, and Jalen said, I can also throw the ball. I said, yeah, I probably should have thought about that before I said it out loud. But you're right, you can throw the ball. But in terms of if you're stacking them with the Cam Wards, Drew Sanders, Jackson Darts, Kyle McCords, Quinn Ewers, Tyler Shucks of the world, he's not as consistent a passer of the football down the field. So how do you reconcile that when you're in the draft room trying to figure out where you're going to take him?
I mean, again, the number one thing, and he was for a while, in the fall, he was my QB3. But he was so, and you saw his deficiencies, in the passing game, all the things that you mentioned. You were worried about the hand size, because there were times where you're watching him throw the ball and it looks like he's palming it because of the hand size. but again, the ball jumps off his hand. But the accuracy issues were an issue for me. But he was so dynamic and so explosive, with the ball in his hand. His acceleration, where he can just hit a crease was like nothing I've ever seen, at the quarterback position in a while. So, comparing him to Malik Willis, the deficiencies I felt were the same. I think both guys were athletic. I think they both had live arms and could throw the ball all over the yard. But the quick processing was a step off. And what I've learned is with quarterbacks who have a live arm, they could be a little late because they can drive the ball and squeeze the ball into those tight windows. Whereas guys who have lesser arm strength has to be a little bit more anticipatory. So that was my comp, for him. And Malik went third round, I believe. And there's a space where, Jalen is a day 2 quarterback. And then my other comp for him was a guy, Taysom Hill, who, another guy that's athletic, that can do a bunch of things with the ball in his hand. And that lends to, Jalen's dynamic ability with the ball in his hands, the explosiveness, the speed, the ability to hit a home run. And in today's game, I'm pretty sure you're not going to have a guy with this type of ability just sitting on the sideline. You're going to find a way to work him into a lineup, a package. And there's a scenario where, he's a part of a quarterback room where he may not be the starter. He's the number 2, and then they have a real guy as the number 3. That way you can work him into packages without having to force him in the game as your number 3, and the other guys have a chance to not re-enter.
I love all that. And in theory, I can buy all that. But what if you're sitting on a 30 visit or the combine interview and Jalen says, I'm a quarterback. I don't want to be doing all this trick play stuff that you guys are trying to scheme up for me?
Well, then again, it depends on who your QB1 is and what your offense looks like. And so and quarterbacks have stated that, if I'm not mistaken. I think same thing came up with Tim Tebow, where he, I'm a quarterback. This is what I want to do. And, a team still took a chance on him. And then, we saw what it was by the end. He was in Jacksonville, I think, trying out as a tight end, in the end. Again, I expect Jalen to want to be a quarterback, but I also expect Jalen to want to play football, which would give him the best chance to play football. And then there's a scenario where he could be used in a Justin Fields type package, where you're still the backup quarterback. You still have a chance to play and throw the ball, but we just want to put you in some packages, get you out there, get the defense off balance. And, this guy, he's catching steam, as we head into these last couple of days of the draft. I want to say he's had 430 visits and as many private workouts, scheduled. And he got an invite to Green Bay, and they don't throw those around easily. So there's a reason why he's got an invite to Green Bay, because the buzz is building around him to be picked fairly early.
Our buddy Jonathan Jones, our NFL insider here at CBS Sports, said Milroe could be the QB3. He talked about that. He reported that on CBS Sports HQ. And JJ was the only media person that I know on planet Earth, maybe somewhere else, some other planet in the galaxy. But he had Michael Penix Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons last year in the one and only mock draft that he did, and he absolutely nailed that. No surprise, he caught a lot of pushback from folks on social media and whatnot, but that was exactly right. So knowing all that, I'm going to ask you this question. So let's say a team like the Giants need a quarterback at the top of the second round, and your choice is between Jalen Milroe and let's say Jackson Dart is there, just because he's QB3 for most folks. And you can run whatever offense you want to run, but you know that you have Russ Wilson, you know that you have Jameis Winston. Who makes the most sense if you're trying to build a team to win in the next couple of years?
Well, I think if we're using the Giants example, specifically, I think Jackson Dart is more of a fit there for Dayball's system, where there's some design run opportunities, and Jackson Dart is athletic in his own right and can pull the ball down and get positive yards when there's green grass ahead. But I think with what Dayball wants to do, just in terms of reading coverages, manipulating safeties, I think that's more so Jackson Dart's game, and he will be a better fit, for the Giants if they were picking early in 2 and you had to choose between those two guys.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I'm glad you added the qualification about what Brian Dibble likes to do. Is there a situation where you think Jalen Milroe, a team that makes the most sense if we're talking about This second round range, early day 2 range?
I mean, if we're looking at it, you got to think about the teams that are picking on the back end, of the draft, of the first round rather. Those earlier teams.
So let's see here. I'll tell you who we got here. Now, after pick 21, that's the Steelers, so everyone knows that by now because it feels like after that they're wide open. It sounds like Sean McVay said he hasn't even watched the quarterbacks, and I don't know if he's just joking around, but it sounds like they're happy with Matthew Stafford and Stetson Bennett and Jimmy G for now. So maybe they'd circle back on day 2 or day 3, but I don't think the first round is going to be a consideration for them. And then after that, everyone has a quarterback. At the top of the second, it's Cleveland, the Giants, Titans, Jags, and then Vegas at 37. I don't know if you want to do that to Geno just yet. And then at 40, you have the Saints. Now, you mentioned Taysom Hill. Is that a situation where you might thinking about doubling down on a Taysom Hill type player behind Derek Carr?
No, I would say not. Just because Taysom Hill has been he started off because I'm just going back to 2017. He was in Green Bay in the preseason and he played strictly quarterback, right? And I'm pretty certain that only Sean Payton had the vision for Taysom Hill that he had, right? Because he was a 4-4 guy, coming out of BYU. And so they claimed him at the deadline, if I'm not mistaken, and then that role evolved. And the head coaches that have come through there kind of just stuck with it. Well, Kellen Moore is coming in with his own offense, that's a little bit different from what's been run in the past. And so I would say no there. I would probably say just going back to those teams, at the top, I could see a scenario where he fits at the Raiders, right? For that same reason we mentioned, like they just gave Geno an extension, and Geno is going to be the QB1. However, you got to have a plan, for the future. And Pete Carroll being a former defensive coordinator, why not have a quarterback that can keep people up at night with their ability to run? So I could see a fit there at the Raiders in the top of 2.
No, that's a good call, too. And Chip Kelly, the new offensive coordinator there, has experience with getting the most out of athletic quarterbacks for sure. This is going to be interesting because there's so much to like about Jalen Milroe, and he's a great kid. I think academically he excels at Alabama, and then, he's great in the community. It was just you want to see him make those improvements basically on just the intermediate throws. We know he can throw the ball out of the building because everything else he does at a high level. You mentioned the hand size. He's 6'1". I don't know how much the 6'1" bothers me. Maybe the hand size does if you're playing in cold weather. But I'll just ask you this one thing, and then we'll move on. Percentage that he's a day 2. It feels like it's pretty high, given the direction we're going here.
No, I think it's a high percentage. Because again, and you have to take the whole picture. You have to bring the whole picture into focus. Everyone's pretty certain of who's going number 1 and how that's going to shake out. But then now the question is, where does Shedeur Sanders land?
Right.
And where and how far down? And so we don't know where that's going to go. And so that could push the position down a little bit further, which brings a guy into day 2, which is where you're going to have the conversation if Jackson Dart is still there, if Tyler Shuck is still there, or Jalen Milroe. So I think those 3 guys in particular, I think it's all dependent on where Shedeur Sanders lands and then where we see the run on quarterbacks.
Yep. No, I think that's right. But that's great. That's good stuff on Jalen because we have not, oddly enough, talked a lot about him, even though he was one of the best players in college football a year ago, and just felt like once we got out of the Senior Bowl run where he was okay. He didn't blow anyone's hair back that week. He didn't have a bad week, but I know I'd heard he was frustrated with how he had practiced, and I get all that as well. And it felt like things started to fizzle a little bit for them. So the arrow is now pointing up on Jalen again. You talked about the 30 visits, and he's going to be at the draft in Green Bay. So it certainly sounds like his name's going to get called sooner rather than later. And if he gets in the right situation, watch out because I think he has a chance to be a really good player. He's just got to, once he gets those intermediate throws in terms of more consistency, then it's going to be go time for sure.
And let's finish here with Jalen.
Yeah.
2 things. At his pro day, he wasn't scheduled to run a 40, and he got coached into running a 40. And depending on which teams and which scouts you talk to, it was anywhere from 4.41 to 4.46. And so that's a thing. And then
that is a thing.
That is a real thing. And then just in terms of him, in terms of his throwing ability, I want to say he's had 3 OCs at
Mm,
Alabama. There's been constant change there. So we're not sure on what he's been asked to do and
that's
how
true.
long he's consistently been able to work on these things. And maybe that's what's swaying teams now that he's in there on these 30 visits and they're getting a chance to see him and hear him and how he processes these different things and all the systems that he's seen. And maybe that's what's starting to catch teams' eye.
Yeah, and that's an important point because a lot of times fans get frustrated with why are guys gaining late buzz. Well, first of all, it's not like everyone's coming to these players at the same time on an NFL staff. I mean, there are guys that are coaching football until January sometimes, and then the scouts have known these kids forever, and then sometimes you don't get these kids until late. I mean, there might be a situation where you're not in the Senior Bowl interviews because you're not there yet, and maybe you see them at the combine, maybe you don't. Then the 30 visits and everyone at this point, 13 days out. Have we buttoned up everything we want to button up in terms of the draft meetings and big board for NFL teams, or is there still loose ends to tie up?
Now, the front board, as you would call it, which is probably usually your top, 150 or so, I'm pretty sure that's pretty buttoned up.
Okay.
At this point, right now, you're probably working on some back end free agent types as you're stacking the list with the coaches and with the scouts and guys that you want to target there. So there's some teams that are wrapping up 30 visits, this week. I know some private workouts will carry into next week. There are some positions and some guys who I know in particular are having some private workouts next week. So they'll get those done. But pretty much your front board should be about wrapped up now.
Hey, Debo, maybe we should take a break here since I went a little long on Jalen, and we'll talk about my QB comp in a second. But one thing I think we should do, Rand, I don't know how I started watching this movie again, but I watched Draft Day, a little bit of it last night with Kevin Costner. And I think we should do, Debo, a live sort of watch party of Draft Day of just how many things don't make sense in real time. Like they hadn't scouted the quarterback until the day of the draft after Kevin Costner traded all those picks. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. Traded all those picks for Seattle to get the #1 overall pick. It's a wild watch. I understand why you're doing it. You're trying to explain to people who maybe don't understand the nuances of how football works, and I understand that part of it as well. But it's funny to see in real time going back how nutty that thing was. Have you seen that, Rand?
Yeah, Netflix got you. It's the top thumbnail on Netflix because I saw it the other day and I just politely skipped over it. But
I
they
fell
got
for
you.
it.
The algorithm worked on you.
It got me. So maybe that's something we can do at some point in the future if Netflix doesn't sue us. Maybe Paramount Plus get the rights to it. And we can do that. All right, Debo, let's take a quick break here, and then I'll come back and tell you my QB comp for one of my favorite players in this draft, and we'll do that right after this.
One of golf's elite courses, Quail Hollow, hosts the game's top players at the PGA Championship this May on CBS.
All right. Also incredibly disrespectful. They made that movie about Cleveland. They couldn't have done any other team. They couldn't give the Browns a break. All right, my guy, Kyle McCord, transferred from Ohio State to Syracuse, so I got to see a lot of him this fall. Talked to him at the Shrine Bowl and the Combine, and a lot of growth from last year at Ohio State to this year for Fran Brown at Syracuse. Broke the ACC passing record. My comp for him ran, and you can grade this too. Have you seen these yet? Are these ones that hit from you?
No, I got them now.
Oh, you got it. Oh, Debo cheated. Okay, yeah, Kirk Cousins. I think he's actually Kirk Cousins is actually a pretty good athlete. Thank you, Debo. Kyle went to the same high school as Marvin Harrison, of course, and there are a couple other guys from the high school in New Jersey who are big time ballers. But just like give me your initial impressions of Kyle McCord, the football player in 2024, because I will oversell it because I'm pretty high on him.
No, I definitely agree with you on the growth from 23 to 24. Haven't seen him live. I was at the Penn State game the year before there, and obviously, going through there to look at Marvin Harrison and those guys. I do see growth. I think he threw the ball over 500. He had over 500 attempts at Syracuse this year compared to a little over 300 at Ohio State, last year. So I don't necessarily agree with the comp, him and Kirko Chains, but I can dig it. I can see some of what you see, but I think for me, Kirko Chains was a little more natural passer.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought the ball came out quicker.
Okay.
Than Cal McCord, but I can dig it. Your Syracuse bias.
Yeah, let me ask you this though. So Kirk came out in 2012, so you had been in the league in the front office 4 years at that point. 4 years at that point. So, do you remember Kirk coming out of Michigan State? Is that your comp, or you mean your comp for Kirk at his prime in the NFL?
No, just Kirk coming out of Michigan State. I try to, if you could compare both. Sometimes it's like for a guy who's accomplished, whatever people say about Kirk, he's accomplished a lot, in this league. And you don't want to compare a guy to a Pro Bowl performance, if it's not warranted. So you go back, you look at what Kirk was at Michigan State. And Michigan State's offense, at that time, they ran a true pro-style offense. It was run, it was play action pass. You saw the 3-step, the 5-step, the 7-step. And I thought he was, his processing skills were still, good, coming out of there. And not knowing Kyle Shanahan then, but knowing Kyle Shanahan now, I could see why, even though they took RG3 at 2, that they would take Kirk, in 4, just because of what I know Kyle wants in his offense, which is a guy that at some point you got to drop back, be able to process and make reads and throw the ball.
Interesting. No, that's a good clarification. And I'm absolutely, based on our buddy Rick Spielman, I'm absolutely okay with you disagreeing with me, because that's become an integral part of this show. But the fact that you did it politely.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, we might have some angry people in the comments like normal. McCord Harrison from a school in Philadelphia, not New Jersey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Right over the border. Thank you, Debo. There are a couple
Rich
of
Gannon, DeAndre Swift.
Okay. Yeah.
Kevin Stefanski, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., to name a few.
Thank you, Debo. Stefanski was the name I was thinking of as well, but you named a couple of the guys I didn't know. In Philly. Apologies. New Jersey, Philly, what's the difference? Let's be honest.
Hey, man, their Cherry Hill guys claim Philly a lot, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Cherry Hill, NJ, if I recall correctly. All right, so let me ask you this, Rand. So Kirk Cousins was a 4th-round pick, so it sounds like you think that Kyle McCord's probably a little further down. It's a day 3 option. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, because I do think, once you get to, probably now we know QB1, QB2, and then there are arguments of who QB3, which would lead to someone being QB4. Then there's a QB5. Now in some mixed bag of Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, and Tyler Shuck. And then how far down is your gap of the next guy is the next argument to have. Right.
Bo Nix was the 12th overall pick, and then my guy last year, Spencer Rattler, didn't go until the 5th round. Do you have a off the top Kyle McCord comp, since I was disrespecting Kirk Chains, I called him Kirk Cousins?
Probably for me, if I had to go off the top, and this is just purely as a matter, because I do think this guy was more athletic, but Jeff Driscoll will be
nice
comp for me. I mean, Driscoll is a real live athlete that I don't think people give credit for.
Right.
And his ability to run. I just think if we're just looking at pure quarterback, I think he's more in that vein for me.
All right, fair enough. I got it. I'm going to say, so give me a round that you say you think Kyle's going to go in, so I can go ahead and just say higher, so I can make a note of it, so I can win that bet.
I could say earliest 5, late 6. Okay. Latest is 6. I'm not saying late 6, but
okay,
5 to 6. You
watch this video. Come on now. I'm not going to disrespect my guy to his face. I'm going to say he's going to go late day 2.
Okay.
You didn't smile. I thought you might smile or laugh, so I appreciate you not doing either of those things. All right, so we usually do dollar bets around here, so let's do a dollar bet on that.
I didn't know if I could bring that up on air, so I was going to text you later and say let's put $1 on it. So
okay, yeah. No, we had a dollar bet going the last few years. I whooped up on Rick last season, so he quit. He didn't want to do it anymore.
Or do you want to do push-ups?
How many push-ups do I have to do? 1? I could do 1 push-up.
No, we could do 10.
I could do 10 push-ups.
But it has to be recorded.
Oh, that's fine.
And share it with Debo.
Let me explain something to both of you guys. When you get to be my age, if you don't do push-ups every day, the whole thing just falls apart. So I'm just trying to maintain this, and this ain't great. So I can do 10 push-ups. Now, if I lose a bunch of these bets, we might be in a situation. But all right, $1/10 push-ups, Debo. We're going to expand the Rick's going to be mad he missed out on the push-ups thing. He's such a meathead. He would love to have done that. All right, so I'm going to say Kyle McCord late day 2, Debo, at the very, I think 102 picks in the first 3 rounds. So I think he goes in the top 102. 10 push-ups on the line. Man, I might just do 1-arm push-ups to make you mad. All right, let's do some running backs here. And we'll start with 2 of your guys here. Trevion Henderson, by way of Richmond, Virginia. That is confirmed. Made his way to Ohio State, had a fantastic career there. And then I'll put him in with Omarion Hampton, the other running back you wanted to talk about, Ran, out of UNC. Omarion has an absolute chance to be a first-round pick. I think Trey is going to go in round 2. And let's start with Trey. What's your comp for him?
My comp for him is Chase Brown. I was out of University of Illinois. That's at Cincinnati now. And oddly enough, this week, Trey Henderson had a 30 visit with Cincinnati. So oddly enough, that happens. But if you look at these guys' measurables, and I'm looking at my notes, Trey Henderson was 5'10", 202, and ran a 4.43. Chase Brown was 5'9.5", 209, and ran a 4.43. Both of these guys will excel in these zone blocking situations where they can press, put their foot in the ground, and then accelerate and attack the hole. And although we're talking 202 and 209 coming out, they're not the heaviest of guys. But what allows them to run through that initial arm tackle is their ability to be decisive and explosive, to attack the hole. So you see that, a lot, but in the comparison between these two guys.
That's a great comp. Chase was a day 3 guy, I recall. I think that's right?
Yeah, I want to say he was 5th round, maybe.
Right, but Trey is going day 2, and but Chase has fit in really well in what they're doing in Cincinnati when he's healthy. His brother, the safety for the Eagles, Sydney, I think he ran a few tenths of a second faster than his twin brother. So that was funny coming out of the combine there. But Trey is going to be one of the first running backs drafted. He's running back 3 for me, and I think he's going to be in that range for a lot of people. All right, next up, Omarion Hampton, and this is a good comp for him. I had trouble coming up with a comp for him because he is special. He's a track guy, even though he's 220. I think he's just a shade under 6 feet. He ran really well at the combine. I think he ran in the 4.4s. Let me double check. But
4.46.
Thank you. So it would almost be a shock at this point, even though we didn't talk a lot about him in the media until the last month or so. It would be a shock at this point, I think, if he doesn't make it into the first round. You think?
Yeah, I think there's a good scenario. He's there in the 20s. That he's coming off the board. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he has a visit this week with Pittsburgh, who's at 21. So that's a really good fit for him there.
That won't make Steelers fans mad after they felt like Najee didn't live up to expectations. Najee, in his defense, was running behind an offensive line that was non-existent at times. Jalen Warren was a little more dynamic when he was on the field, fair enough, but Omarion Hampton is a different type of player. What was your comp for Hampton?
My comp for him was Joe Mixon. And we're talking 2 guys that are a load to bring down, 2 guys that are not shy when it comes to creating contact. And I would say that would probably be a little bit knock on Omarion at this point, just being able to make guys miss at the second level, to get more yardage, in which I think that he'll grow, from that aspect. But these are 2 guys who have acceleration. These guys are 3-down guys. They can catch the ball. They can pass protect. And, I just think from a size perspective, Joe Mixon was a shade over 6 feet, 228. Omarion was almost 6 feet. I want to say he was 5'11 3/4, 221. We're talking a 4.5 flat for Joe Mixon, 4.46 for Omarion Hampton. And, Omarion had a 38-inch vertical. Joe had a 35-inch vertical. So you can see the explosive numbers there. And I just think both of these guys, man, over time, over a 4-quarter game, they will wear you down and then have what I always refer to as that close the door ability. You're up 4 points, you're in your 4-minute offense, and then you got these guys that can hit the home run, put the game out of reach, and close the door.
Yeah, that's a great comp for the reasons you laid out. And also, I think Mixon would have been a first-round pick. He was dealing with some off-field things that saw him slip a little bit. And the other thing is that Amari can catch passes coming out of the backfield. He returned kicks in 2023, so he gives you some versatility there. And he improved as a blocker, I thought, as well, in terms of pass protection. All right, this is a young man that our buddy Pete Prisco is very high on, running back out of Texas, Jaden Blue. And Jaden's he's young, get a little stronger, I think. One of the issues I had with him in terms of the notes I made, I wanted to see him run through more arm tackles, but there's no doubting how fast this young man is.
Yeah, this was a guy, man, that immediately jumped off the tape. For me, I can just remember specifically watching Quinn Ewers and the quarterbacks, and just keep asking. I had called in one of the scouts and say, "Hey, man, who is 23? Who is this guy?" And I'll say this first: my comp for him was Jahmyr Gibbs, just from the standpoint of the explosiveness, the ability to make you miss. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs is a completely different animal. I just remember his pro day being one of the most impressive things, watching him go through the bags, and you literally could not hear his feet hit the ground. So that was beyond impressive to me. But the one thing that stood out when you watch Jaden Blue run, the first defender never brings him down. And he has what we would call, and shout out to my man, Brian Heimerdinger and Ray Agnew at Detroit. He had what we call BIP, and we have what we call a BIP meter. Does he have BIP? Does he have bip bip? And this guy definitely has that bip bip. He can make you miss. He can dead leg you. He can shake you. And it's very rare that the first guy brings him down. So I could see him getting in the right offense, excelling and playing in that third down role where he could be a problem catching passes out of the backfield.
4.38. So he's got some juice.
And just so I could be a measurable junkie here in my comparisons.
Yeah.
Jaden Blue, 5'9", 196. His 10-yard split was a 1.52, ran 4.38. Jahmyr Gibbs, 5'9", 199, 1.52, 10-yard split, and ran 4.36.
All right, we get it. You might be good at this, okay? My comp, it's funny you mentioned that Jahmyr Gibbs pro day, because I was talking about that the other day in terms of the most impressive thing I'd seen in person, even though he didn't run a 40 for the reasons you're talking about. And I was talking about it in comparison to what Travis Hunter was doing last week when we saw him in person, moving the way he did. I think you said his ankles bend ways that other people's ankles don't bend, just the change of direction. And I was talking to our buddy Lee J. Doosbull, and you made the same note that he was running routes against air that no one's going to be able to run in the NFL, but he made them look amazing just because he was so dynamic with the change of direction. But yeah, the Jahmyr Gibbs thing reminded me of that, because I remember sitting there at Tuscaloosa going, sweet mercy, how is that a real thing? And it was. By the way, I'll let you grade my comp for my more reasonable comp for Jaden Blue. I don't want to put Jahmyr Gibbs on him. I put James Cook on him.
Yeah, I can see that. Just
All right.
The smoothness and the ability to glide,
All right,
and weave. I can see that. I was a big fan of James Cook coming out, in a role. And I will say I didn't think that he would be, a 1,000+ Pro Bowl type rusher. I thought he would be really good in the tandem, but I was a big fan of his coming out.
Yeah, I got James Cook wrong, especially in that fit, because I think they still had Devin Singletary there, and Bills fans got pretty unhappy with me about it. And they were right. James Cook is a dude. So my apologies to him, and I'll apologize to Dalvin too while I'm at it. I just realized this, Rand. You told me this, that you were going to make this run on running backs. This is where you want to talk up your running back. So I only did one. You did three. But I did Brashard Smith, who I love Brashard Smith out of SMU. I don't know if you have a chance to see him yet. Because he is either our buddy Pete Prisco or Christian McCaffrey coined this term, but airback. He's a guy that he's going to run the ball, but you can get him in space as a former wide receiver and use him much more, using a bigger package than you might for a regular quote unquote running back, just because of his ability to catch the ball. And I love that versatility about him. My comp for him was Bucky Irvin. And Bucky only ran in the 4.5s, I think. But I love Bucky coming out of Oregon. But our guy Brashard ran a 4.39. He's almost 5'10", 194, and played at the U for 3 seasons for coming over to SMU. And he was targeted 56 times last season. Only had 2 drops, and he's electric coming out of the backfield. Had 7 games of over 100 rushing yards. And I like the versatility that he brings. Slasher with a little juice to get to the edge. He can run between the tackles. I like to see him run with better vision, but maybe that's a function of him sort of learning the position, and you can speak to that as a running back who understands what these guys are supposed to be looking at once they get the ball in their hands or even pre-snap. But what were your thoughts on Brashard Smith coming out of SMU.
Big fan. Big
Oh, good.
fan. And I'm glad you hit on him coming from the U. He's a South Florida kid. So you have your biases. I have mine. But no, I think, and the cool thing for him, he's only going to get better because this is a new position for him. Right. And there are nuances. There are certain guys you have that are just natural run to daylight. And I think that's what allows him to excel in this running back role so quickly, is because he just has natural run to daylight ability. But once he has time to learn the nuances of reading defenses and understanding what defenses are trying to do, the shift and the reading the three, fill the one, and seeing the backers flow and being able to learn how to set blocks, he's only going to get better. And like you said, I'm just thinking of ways that Christian McCaffrey was used in San Fran, where you have 11 personnel and then you put Christian McCaffrey in the slot. And then, like, okay, what do? Do you put a tight end on George Kittle? A linebacker on George Kittle and the safety on McCaffrey, or do you switch it? And then where's the matchup? And so he gives you those type of things. And then ultimately, if he's your RB2, this guy could be your kick return with the way the new kickoff rule is set. And then now he can use that run to daylight ability. So big fan of his.
Oh, good. That makes me feel good. Yeah, I love him, and we haven't heard a lot about him in the media, but there's so many running backs in this class that I understand that. But I'm glad he's getting his due, and I think he has a chance to be a really good player, even if he ends up going on day 3, and that's where he ends up. I like him a little bit more than that, but he's a guy that's going to come in that feels like can help you right away, whether it's a third down back or whether you're going to use him in the run game, or excuse me, the return game, as Rand mentioned. All right, let's talk about some wide receivers here. I have 2 players that I wanted to highlight. Matthew Golden, my comp for him forever has been Jordan Addison. He actually ran a little faster than Jordan ran the 4.4, so Matthew ran 4.29, so a lot faster, I guess, if we're going to be real about it. But just in terms of similar size, playmaking ability down the field, the ability to make guys miss in space, and he outplayed Isaiah Bond, in part because Isaiah was banged up during the season for Texas. But the Houston transfer came on like gangbusters. And I remember the knock against Jordan was that he weighed 175 or so. Matthew weighs a little bit more than that. I think he's close to 190. Do you consider Matthew Golden a first-round pick? Because he's my wide receiver 2, if we're taking Travis out of the mix after non-Travis consideration. He's my wide receiver 2 after Ted McMillan. And then any concerns about the size or any of that stuff when it comes to him at the next level?
No, I do see him as a first-round pick, and I thought more of the Jordan Addison comp just in terms of the type of role he can play if he got with the right offense, who maybe had a number 1, and you put this guy opposite of him. You've seen him mock to Arizona. I know when we did a mock, I had him mock to Seattle, and some people may not see the fit, but when you have a Jackson Smith and Jigba, when you have him and a Cooper Kupp, who are guys that excel underneath, and you have a guy like adding a Matthew Golden to be able to stretch the field vertically and create some of those explosive plays, and could also fit in Arizona, where you play him opposite of Marvin. Now, I do see Marvin Harrison more of an X, which is where I also see him, but I think Marvin has the size and the hands and the toughness to excel in those underneath in that Z type role. But I do see him as a first round pick, and I think he could be a really good addition to an offense in the NFL.
All right, I'm on board with that. 91 targets last year, and he played mostly outside, so you can move him around at the next level. Even if your plans for him are in the slot, he can line up outside if you need him to. The other guy I want to talk about, and this guy didn't come on my radar until he was a late add to the Senior Bowl. Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas, transferred from Hillsdale College. I always want to call it Hillman, like he was out there with Dwayne Wayne. But Hillsdale's a real college. D2 school, 6'3.5", 214, 10-inch hands, ran a 4.43. He didn't start at Arkansas. He played outside. He played inside. He's a huge target, and he is, to me, a souped-up version of sort of Cooper Kupp coming out of Eastern Washington. Is he going to be Cooper Kupp at the next level? Almost certainly not. But just the size that he's a big target in the middle of the field, and he's going to sort of be trying to think of. He'll be a more, and you can actually speak to this, a more athletic version perhaps of Juwan Jennings, a guy who didn't test necessarily extremely well, but is used exactly how he needs to be used in that offense in San Francisco. Did you get a chance to watch Isaac, and what were your thoughts on him?
I haven't had a chance to
Oh, good.
watch him. So just like, Debo and I give you homework on albums and hip hop, this will be my homework, when we get off. But to speak to Cooper Kupp, because I went into Eastern Washington that year, because it was Cooper Kupp, it was Kendrick Bourne, and it was Shaq Hill, all 3,000-yard receivers. And the best thing I could ever say about Cooper Kupp, I was standing on the practice field, and I have all 3 receivers, and I'm talking to them. And I asked them to rank each other.
Oh, okay.
Like from 1 to 3. And you would have to know KB, Kendrick Bourne, you would have to know him. And KB just looked at me and he pointed at Coop. He was like, this guy's the GOAT. He's number one.
Wow.
He's the best, out of all of us. And so, I thought that was a cool moment. But man, Cooper Kupp was different. He was just different, where you could break down and say he didn't have the speed. And you ask, how's he going to separate? And I remember being in the room and being asked that question because I had a good grade on him and saying he's going to separate with his brain, which is what you see him doing in the National Football League now, separating with his brain. So I'm excited to watch this kid if you're comparing him to Cooper Kupp, because I think there should be something to see on tape. And, I'm pretty sure Hillman never had a good player like this come through.
Hillman or Hillsdale. He left Hillsdale. I think his dad played at Hillsdale too, and that's maybe why he started there. Yeah, he did. His dad was a wide receiver there. So yeah, I want to get your thoughts on that. And that's high praise for Cooper Kupp, but just in terms of the big slide ability, and he's a little faster just on in terms of the time numbers. So I've been talking him up since the Senior Bowl. Haven't heard a lot about him, so we'll see. We'll find out together. All right, let's talk about a couple of defensive backs here. You got Malachi Moore out of Alabama, maybe one of the smartest kids in this draft. And what was your athletically? He's not going to be up there with the Jahdae Barons of the world, but I think he does a lot with his brain. What was your comp for Malachi?
My comp for him was Micah Hyde. Again, looking at the measurables, we're talking 5'11", 2, 197, 4.53 for Malachi, and we're talking 5'11", 6, 197, 4.55 for Micah. And I think both of these guys are really, really smart, really instinctive. They're tough. You can play them down in the box. You can play them in the post. And, for even people that feel like they may be at best above average athletes, their ability and to process and their instinctiveness allow them to do things a tad quicker than what their athletic numbers say that they should, allow them to do. And this guy, he moved into that Brian Branch role. And I could just remember being at the Vanderbilt game this year. And even though they lost that game, he was absolutely pissed. And you could feel his leadership and just his dog mentality, on the field. So I became a real big fan of Malachi.
Yeah, he was not happy with how that game went for sure. And I think he's going to get drafted. And I think he's going to be one. I like the Micah Hyde comp, a guy who could play for 10 years, but just because he's smarter than everyone else on the field. That's not to say he's a bad athlete, but he's not going to be Travis Hunter out there athletically. And that's okay. Right. I'm going to go with a guy I've been talking about.
Your guy,
Jahdae Barron. And his tape is what it is. It's great. And then when we talked to him at the combine I was ready to run through a wall. Like, he was so jacked up to talk about football and how locked in he was. He knows everyone's position. He played slot. He played corner. He can play free safety. He can play close to the line if you want him to, but he knows what everyone's doing in an effort to make himself better, but in an effort to also help his team on that side of the ball. And my comp for him is the obvious one in Brian Branch. Now, the difference is Brian ran a 4.58. We all overthought it. He went in the second round. Jahdae ran a 4.39. He's going to be a first-round pick. But the other comp that I came to in terms of when he plays in the slot is Javon Bullard out of Georgia last year. And I liked him a lot coming out, and he had a really good rookie season. But Jahdae Barron feels like one of these guys that is going to be a locker room guy. He's going to know exactly where he needs to be on the field, and then he's going to be able to make plays. Do you see anything differently? Do you think anything you see that you like about him or that gives you pause when you talk about potentially as a top 15 guy?
No, I don't. And over the process, he just continued to grow on me, and really like, and I love his versatility. And I think I've probably been one of the few that feels like he can make that transition to safety, depending on what team, takes him, and you could just move him around. And he's a true matchup guy. I think he can play outside. And I also think obviously he can play in the slot, but I think there's some packages where you could put him in the post and get him, back deep and play with range, over the top. So it's cool to see you compare him to two safeties. But there's a good feeling about this kid heading into, this year's draft that I think may surprise some people where he ultimately ends up.
I love it. Yeah, because they got us doing these mock drafts all year long. So when you're in early January, just outside of the Senior Bowl, and you have Jade going top 15, you feel a little weird about it, but you're like, this dude's balling out. And then you sort of see everyone catch up to you, and that makes you feel okay with the evaluation. But yeah, I don't know what the holes are in this young man's game, and he's all about ball and all about team. So those are great starting points when you're trying to take a guy in the first round. All right, Rain, that's it for our favorite draft comps. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to do finding the next fill in the blank rookie superstar from last year. Who's going to be that person in this year's draft class? We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, Rand, let me read you these specific instructions from producer Debo. Folks get mad when things don't go the way they think they're going to go. Finding the next, that's going to be the segment. And I'm going to read you the instructions from Debo. So please make note of this before you leave an angry comment, acting as if you didn't listen to this part of it. We're not trying to make a comp here based on play style, but making the comp based on expected and potential contributions as a rookie. So, and I'll even give you some of mine from last year. Let's see what I said last year. Finding the next last year. I'll do this quickly here. Finding the next. This is, you know what? You can take part in this game. This is actually pretty easy. The next CJ Stroud coming into the 2024 season. I'll let you have your choice of guys. Who would you have taken?
From last year?
Yeah.
My mind is drawing a blank. I don't even know who was in last year's.
I took Jaden Daniels. I got that one right.
Oh, well, there you go.
Rick took Caleb. Caleb felt like a home run. It felt like everything was set up for perfectly in Chicago. Turns out nothing was set up perfectly in Chicago. But Jaden, man, those guys crushed it. Cliff Kingsbury and Dan Quinn. Jaden Reed. I got that one wrong. I said Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin was okay. Rick said Ricky Pearsall. Pearsall balled out when he was healthy. I really missed on Puka Nacua, the next Puka Nacua. I really liked Bub Means coming out of Pitt. And I think he had a few catches for New Orleans, but we don't need to go any further than that.
This is a tough one, man.
It is tough.
This is a tough because it's a lot of context that goes into it. So,
all right. So the next Bo Nix, and a QB that's not at the top of the draft boards but can instantly contribute. And Bo Nix I was hugely surprised. Were you a Bo Nix guy a year ago?
I was good with Bo Nix, and I thought that there was a little bit more there than what people believe, because I know in the scouting community people couldn't get the Auburn stuff, out of their head, and
right.
I'm not going to say people ignored what they saw in Oregon, but it was almost like proceed with caution, and I think everyone was wrong, with the exception of George Payton and Sean Payton and their staff. So.
Yeah, they got that one right 100%. All right, who is the next Bo Nix? And again, fit's going to matter, but just not knowing where these young men end up. Who do you got?
I went with Jackson Dart.
Okay.
Just because I feel like, again, we don't know where QB2 or the perceived QB2 is going to end up.
Right.
And so if Jackson Dart does fall in line to be QB3 and he's picked later, conventional wisdom says that he's going to go to a team with better talent and had a better record. Which I think was what happened with Bo Nix last year. He went to a team that had a little more talent than people gave credit to. And they're a very well coached team. So I think Jackson Dart is a fit there for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Broncos are so good now that we have trouble doing like 3-round mock drafts for Denver, because they have dudes that are pretty well stocked up and down the roster, because it starts, as you talk about, with George Payton and Sean, and then you get Bo Nix right. And then you got Evan Ingram, so you don't necessarily have to get a tight end in round 1. If you get Amari and Hampton in round 1, now they're really cooking. I went with big shocker here, Kyle McCord. I mean, you know,
Homer.
Oh, that's right, my homeboy, Kyle McCord. You know what's funny, Rain? I told him at the Shrine Bowl, I said, because I was a huge Spencer Rattler guy a year ago, I said, Kyle, you're my Spencer Rattler this year. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. He's like, man, I don't know what that means. I said, fair enough. I should have given that some context, but that's a good thing for you. So, but I think the point that you made for Jackson applies for Kyle, and maybe even to a little higher degree. If you end up backing up Brock Purdy in San Francisco or Matthew Stafford in LA, that's a great situation for you. If you go somewhere where you might have to play right away, that's less great. So it all comes down to context when we talk about these quarterbacks. But Bo Nix context could not have been more perfect for him, and you can say that for Michael Penix Jr. As well, who balled out for the Falcons. All right, the next all-world tight end, that's got to be the Brock Bowers Award. We saw this young man at the Miami Pro Day. Who are you going with?
I went with Elijah Arroyo, and I just want to add my context here,
Okay.
just because this position is so tricky in terms of just being able to have such a huge impact.
Right.
Because if you go back to Kyle Pitts, his rookie year, and he caught for over 1,000 yards. I want to say that was the first time in 60 years that a rookie tight end had 1,000 yards receiving. And then 3 years later, Brock Bowers comes in and he lights it up as well. But I want to just make the point that both of those guys became the number 1 target in the passing game for their teams. I want to say Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley was out and only played, 5 games for them that year. Devontae was traded, although Jacoby Myers, stepped in and also had 1,000 yards. Brock Bowers had 153 targets to Jacoby Myers 129. So this was a tough one. I went with Elijah Arroyo, not saying that he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver, but I think he will be a viable part of a team's offense, and give them that security blanket underneath and that chain mover.
Yeah, and I even looked up Sam Laporta, who was a rookie in 2023. He had just shy of 900 yards. So even though he was as good as he wasn't as heavily leaned upon. They had other dudes, of course, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, for example, as Kyle Pitts was, or certainly Brock Bowers. I went with Colston Loveland, and again, you couldn't be more right about how context matters. Like I really liked Ben Sinnott last year coming out of Kansas State. He went in the second round to Washington and was rarely used, and part of that may have had to do with his blocking because they have some dudes that can block behind Zach Ertz, John Bates, for example. But Colston Loveland, he again reminds me of a big slot. He can block if you want him to, but that's not why you're drafting him top 32. And he runs through arm tackles. He's a really good route runner. And if he's in the right system, and by the way, I think we should know that Brock Bowers, it did not matter who the quarterback was for Vegas. He was going for 100 every game, which is even crazier to think about. But I love the idea of Colston going to the Broncos. That's probably since been lessened a little bit with the addition of Evan Ingram. But in a situation like that, where you can just wear out your tight end, and we like to give Bo Nix a hard time for getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Well, that's perfectly suited to what Colston Loveland or Evan Ingram or whoever brings to your offense. So we'll see where he ends up, but I think he has an opportunity to perhaps approach what Sam Laporta did in year one. 1,000 yards is super rich for me, but to your point, sometimes these tight ends is so hard to tell how they make the transition because everybody's bigger, stronger, faster on defense. And I would imagine, and you see this with wide receivers too, Rand. So I'll ask you this. How do you see similar issues with tight ends just trying to figure out where they're supposed to be, and you can see the wheels turning until, the middle of the season when they start to figure things out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And because like you said, in talking about Colston, like you see him more as a big slot. And that's what a lot of these tight ends are now. They're the bigger receiver, who doesn't test as well. And so they make the transition. And so a lot of these guys have never been asked to play in line, where you got a 5 technique right over your face and you got to block them and, be more of an inline blocker. And they've never had that. So they tend to get beat up a little bit. But like you said, going back to the Denver thing, you couldn't ask to be, if you're a tight end, you couldn't ask to be in a better offense than the Sean Payton offense. Because if you go back to his days in Dallas, where he had Jason Witten, you go to his days in New York, where he had Jeremy Shockey, and then he brought Shockey with him to New Orleans, and then it was Jimmy Graham. Like, the tight end plays a huge part in that offense. So that's a good call by you, Ryan.
Thank you. I appreciate the positive reinforcement. All right, next up. Guys that slip with Rookie of the Year potential, and this is the Jared Verse Award because Jared Verse, Leatu Latu was the first defensive player taken off the board last year in the middle of round 1, and Jared slipped a little bit to the bottom of round 1 to the Rams, and when Les Snead or Sean McVay call your name, that probably means you're going to be a good player. So who is your Jared Verse nominee for 2025?
My Jared Verse nominee, not to be confused with playing the same side of the ball, but I went with Shedeur Sanders, because if Shedeur does indeed fall, particularly to say the 20s, if one of the teams in the 20s trades up and get him, you're putting him in a good situation where he has talent around him and he'll be in a position where he can win and have an impact on the game. So I went with Shedeur.
Just to be clear, Jared Verse is an edge rusher, Shedeur's a quarterback. The point is that a guy who with potential rookie of the year opportunities slips in the first round. Let me ask you this. Let's say he lasts till 21 and Shedeur is drafted by the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers signs with the Steelers. Is the plan, if you're Omar Khan, all right, we're going to let Shedeur ease into this thing. Aaron Rodgers is going to be our guy in 2025. I can't imagine Aaron plays beyond that. And then Shedeur with the understanding that it's his job in 2026 to compete for. Does that seem like a working game plan for the next 1 or 2 years?
It could. Definitely can see that logic. But I would counter that logic and say, when has Mike Tomlin ever eased into anything?
That's fair.
So I think if they draft him in round 1, because if I'm not mistaken, it was the same thing with Kenny Pickett. I think he was just thrown in there, year 1. And so why not give him the same chance?
Yeah, they brought in Mr. Trubisky to be the guy, and that was the difference. Is Mr. Trubisky is probably a little bit easier to get along with than Aaron Rodgers. Just me speculating. I don't know either of these young men, so we'll see. But Mike Tomlin is certainly he brings an aura about him. So we'll see how those two personalities get along should they have that opportunity. All right, my Jared Verse nominee was JT Tuimoloau, a guy that obviously balled out for Ohio State because they won the national title, and he was a big part of that. But we haven't talked a lot about him in terms of this edge rush class, which we spent a lot of time talking about. I was at that pro day a few weeks ago for Ohio State, and they had 18 guys work out, and 18 guys are probably going to get drafted. I think he has a chance to be a mid-day 2 pick, maybe an early day 2 pick, mid-second round pick, I should say, maybe an early second round pick, because he does a lot of things well. He's 265, I believe. He tested well, and then he plays with his hair on fire. So I could see him in certain schemes. He feels like a Detroit Lion in some sense. So if he went to the bottom of round 1, that wouldn't completely surprise me. So that was my Jared Verse guy. All right, now we're getting to my award. And you were a Ladd McConkey guy last year too, I recall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's get second round impact wide receiver. I'm going to just keep bringing it up until something changes. I'm still perplexed why the Patriots traded down and passed on Ladd McConkey, and they ended up with Jalen Polk. Just take Ladd McConkey. I think that Drake May would have appreciated that. So who is your Ladd McConkey nominee for 2025?
My Ladd McConkey nominee was Luther Burden. And I think Luther Burden, there are some arguments for him to be wide receiver 2 in this class. And I think there's a scenario where he slides a little bit just due to some inconsistencies in play over the last 2 years and maybe some off the field stuff. But I think you put this guy who has dynamic ability, he has run after the catch ability. He can do a lot of things. He can play outside. He can play inside. You get this guy going with the right quarterback and in the right system, I think he could put up some really big numbers very early.
Yeah, and I'm with Emeka Egbuka, who didn't. I don't think he ran quite as fast as Luther. He ran 4.47 in his pro day, but he's another big slot. But he can play outside and incredibly good route runner. I think he's a young quarterback or an old quarterback, their best friend, because he's going to be exactly where he's supposed to be. He will block. He's a great teammate, so on and so forth. And again, he's not going to blow you away with any one thing that he does at a high level. He's not going to run a 4.29 or whatever. But I think he's better than Jackson Smith-Njigba coming out. And Jackson was a 20th overall pick, I think, a few years ago. And he may end up slipping till round 2 just because there'll be a run on these defensive guys and some of these offensive linemen. But I really like what he does. And he's been a popular landing spot for Steelers. The Steelers at 21. I think Steelers fans will be pretty happy with that. All right. You know this young man very well. We talked about him on a previous podcast, T'Vondre Sweat out of Texas. And he slipped to round 2 because he got a DUI a few weeks before the draft, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys took him in round 2 and he ended up being one of your best players. Who is your T'Vondre Sweat guy for 2025?
My Meatloaf is his nickname. My Meatloaf Award nominee is James Pierce Jr. And, we've talked about this on a previous pod. where coming into the year, he was most people's, number one edge guy. And just purely ability alone. And I think the character concerns are what's going to cause him to slip. I know he's doing the circuit now in terms of 30 visits, people really getting in to get to know him. And I think that's going to be the big thing. And I've continued to do the research after we spoke about him, the other day, just through some contacts at the University of Tennessee. And that's going to be the big thing for him, is finding the right landing spot for him where there's some balance for him and he continues to develop and mature. But man, you get this guy on the football field, he's lights out. He's athletic. You can move him around. You can make him your spinner, align him over the center, align him over the guard. You can rush him off the edge, and he can bring some dynamic pass rush ability to any team that he goes to.
Yeah, he's special, and you're exactly right. If we were just looking at strictly on-field productivity, he feels like a top 10 guy. I went with Mike Green, and those are the two guys that we've sort of been talking about through this process, is having to sort through some off-field things. From the folks I've spoken with, it feels like there's less concern about Mike Green than James Pierce off the field. But on the field, these guys have been dominant at times, and we'll see how it ends up for them. But things went pretty well for T'Vondre Sweat, because, as you said before, you had him into the building. He was trying to make sure he made clear to everyone who would listen that he is all about football, and he made a mistake. But going forward, he was locked in and had a really good rookie season, right?
Yeah, correct. And again, it was work put in by our staff, just in terms of getting to know him, getting to know the people that he surrounds himself with, and then just having a plan, for him. Shout out to my former assistant GM, Anthony Robinson, who met with him on a weekly basis to make sure that he was in line, and that all phases of his game, just in terms of meeting with the position coach, strength staff, nutritionist, player engagement, his mom, like A-Rob did a really good job of keeping those things aligned, which helped, Sweat make the transition.
And that's also the other important part. Like, these guys are 21, 22 years old, and I've said it all the time, man. I could have used someone like that help me hold my hand and get me through my early 20s, because I made a lot of mistakes, but luckily cell phones hadn't been invented yet, so I was spared that. All right, let's do this is the Debo Award. His guy, Cooper DeJean, second-round pick, mostly because of he had a foot injury that didn't allow him to work out much in the pre-draft process, but I loved his tape, and then obviously he proved himself worthy of being much more than a second-round pick with the way he played down the stretch, especially in the Super Bowl. Who's your Cooper DeJean nominee for 2025?
So I'll admit, Debo kicked my ass a little bit on this one because, again, going with the context, you have to pick a guy that could be with a potential playoff team.
Yeah, let me actually be clear, Rand. Super Bowl hero was that's the Cooper DeJean angle here, not just a guy that slips because of the injury concern. But right, so a guy that you have to predict is going to make a big play in the postseason.
And so with that said, you have to pick a guy who could potentially go to a team that will have a shot at the postseason, as well as play a position that will have an impact on a game, that people will vote to be a Super Bowl hero,
right,
if you will. So I went with Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. If you look back and, at worst, I'll say he'll be your sub rusher. A guy that can come in that's fresh, that's young, that's spry, that's explosive, that's bendy. They can come in and make some plays for you in the sub packages. And I can see a guy like him closing out a game with a big sack, forced fumble that creates a turnover for your team and helps you win. So I went with him.
Yeah, and just looking at the teams last year, they're in the mix. Like, I could see him dominating on the Commanders, the Bills, the Chiefs, even Debo. Howie could add him to Jalix Hunt and to Nolan Smith. Just get another Nolan Smith type in there and just rotate those guys. So that's actually a pretty good call. And I think Donovan has a chance to be a first-round pick as well. I went with Will Johnson, a guy who, as we record this, he has April 14th, I think he's going to try to run, and we'll get a true sense for how fast he is. I heard he had not been working out that fast during his workouts, as fast as he wants to work out. I'll say it that. He wasn't – I'm sure he wasn't running the 4.40 he wanted to run. So we'll see, and hopefully he hits the number he wants to hit. And if he does that, I think he'll be comfortably in the first round. But that's a concern because let me ask you this, Rand. If Will runs a 4.62 or something, and we saw this a little bit with Joey Porter Jr., how much does that concern you if you're going to take him in the first round?
I mean, it's something that you will have to have a plan for, just in terms of top end speed and when you want to play some man. and what you have to do. But I mean, if you look at, through the history of the game, and you can speak to it. I don't remember off the top of my head what Joey Porter Jr. ran, but if I'm not mistaken, Richard Sherman wasn't a top end speed fast guy, but he excelled in that cover 3 defense that he played in Seattle at the time, and it only helped him to have a Cam Chancellor and an Earl Thomas back there roaming, behind him, so he could take more risk underneath. But I think Will Johnson will figure it out. No matter what he runs in the 40, I think he'll figure it out. I think he'll figure out how to play. And here's the thing. We don't know how fast he is. He knows what he's been running at Michigan all these years and leading up to it. We just don't know that. And so he's managed to get this far and be considered a first-round prospect with the speed he has. So I don't think it'll affect him so much as it'll shade us into what we think about it.
And that's a good point, because over the summer he was the number 1 player on my big board coming into the fall, and he just had the turf toe and then the hamstring injury, so we haven't seen him run. And then you start hearing things, and that affects your opinion of who he is, even though you saw him play and you know what he can do. So he's a first-round talent, but maybe he slips a little bit if he doesn't run what he wants to and goes to a team with an opportunity to go to make a deep Super Bowl run.
And Ryan, Debo just dropped in the chat that Richard Sherman ran a 4.6 at the combine. So
there you go. Thank you, Debo. I'm looking at Joey Porter Jr. It says he ran a 4.46, but he ran north of 4.5, and I know he was upset with that. So maybe at his pro day he got it down a little bit. But he was first pick in the second round, if I recall correctly. All right, Tyrone Tracy, late round running back award, and Tyrone is another one of these guys. I guess I could have gone with my guy Brashard Smith here because he was a former wide receiver as well. I did not. But let's start with you, Rand. Who is the late round running back who has a chance to be an impact player as a rookie?
I went with Raheem Sanders. Big explosive back, out of Arkansas, and had somewhat of a down year this year. But if he gets back to the 2023 version, I think he'll be a problem. I think there's an element where he fits in a gap, a gap scheme team or a mid zone team. But he's a big, explosive, strong guy that if you're taking him late round, then he can make a splash for you if given the opportunity. He's going to have to be in a situation where he gets a little volume, where he's not just a 3 or 4 carry a game guy, but if he's in a situation where he can get volume and get touches, I think he can have an impact as a rookie.
Yeah, and that's a great point about the way he played at Arkansas, and he was highly thought of a few years ago, and then he had a good game against LSU, I recall, last season, so it feels like a late round opportunity to be an impact player. I went with Devin Neal out of Kansas, and Devin only ran a 4.58. I don't care about that because I'm looking at my notes. I described him as water bug quicks, and we talked to him at the Senior Bowl, and this is a guy that loves football as well. Like, he's locked in. He was completely devoted to Kansas. He wasn't thinking about leaving. He wanted to make that program as good as possible. You talked to a lot of those kids in that Kansas program. They said the exact same thing. Kobe Bryant was another one who was a fun guy to talk to and watch play. But Devin Neal's a completely different body type. But I think he can give you a little something in his own scheme. He can catch the ball coming out of the backfield, and he'll probably slip till day 3, maybe late to day 3 just because of the time. But I am not at all concerned about that.
And I'll tell you this: Devin Neal is very, very well thought of in the analytic community.
Oh, good.
And so his numbers shape up there, especially when you add into the fact if he goes to a wide zone team and his numbers there. So he's well thought of there.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes here. Good fit for zone scheme because it's one cutback ability. Look at that. Anybody can do this, Rand. All right, finally, the Joe Milton Award, the QB trade chip. And Joe Milton was traded for, I believe, a 5th-round pick. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Rand, to the Dallas Cowboys after what I would argue was probably the best game of Joe Milton's career, unless you go back to Pee Wee ball, the way he played in Week 18 and kept the Patriots from getting that first overall pick. But he is now a member of the Dallas Cowboys. And who is your Joe Milton Award nominee?
My nominee was Tyler Shuck out of Louisville.
Right.
And, I see him as a guy that will probably be a day 2 pick, that he will be there in that argument for, QB 3, 4, 5, depending on where you see him. And I just went through and watched and buzzed that Miami game from last year. and watched him play and his ability to just make quick decisions, get the ball out. Now, I know there's going to be some injury concern, and just being a 1-year starter, be 26 years old, by the start of the season. But I could see him going day 2 and then having a good preseason, and then a year from now, when a team elsewhere has a chance to get out of one of those big quarterback contracts, and reaching out and trading for him just because they had love for him in his pre-draft process. So that made a whole lot of sense for me in that Joe Milton category.
Yeah, and it almost feels like what we thought was going to happen with Tanner McKee, Debo's guy at Philly. We thought that he had an opportunity to get drafted because he plays well every preseason, and then he somehow sticks on the roster. They moved on from Kenny Pickett this time around, but Tanner McKee was another popular name that remains in Philly, but as a possible trade candidate. We're going to have a conversation, Debo. Make a note. I want to go deep dive on Tyler Shuck with Rand, because Rand, like a lot of guys I talked to in the league, are Tyler Shuck guys, and I don't see it. So maybe you can help me figure it out, because I don't want to crush the kid, but I'm just trying to get on the same page as everyone. All right, my Joe Milton nominee was Riley Leonard, and Riley Leonard he's athletic, and that's where you have to start the conversation. So you got to find a way to use him where he's going to feature his athleticism, because he doesn't have the best arm in the world. I didn't see the progress I was hoping to see at Notre Dame after he left Duke, but in terms of a Taysom Hill type, maybe you get there, but I think this was a tough one for me, because if you draft a kid in the first or second round, you're probably not going to move on from him. And then to me, Riley's a day 3 guy, but you have to find a role for him that maybe not just be strictly quarterback. So you have to talk him into being, doing things that maybe he's not accustomed to doing if you're trying to get the Taysom Hill thing out of him. So this is just me throwing a dart at the dartboard and hoping to get it right. So
I'm glad you clarified.
This was a tough one for me.
And I'll say, going back to Tyler Shuck and my thought process with him, the thing I thought about in watching him and thinking about this exercise was when we were in San Francisco and we traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. And Jimmy G was a second-round pick. Now, granted, he was sitting behind Tom Brady, and there was no space for him to, ever beat out Tom per se. However, it happens, and this could be a situation where the transition plan is for Tyler Shuck to be the next guy, and the person he's sitting behind continues to elevate. So that was the number one thing that stood out in my mind, was the Jimmy G trade, and being able to, they took the guy in the second round and then being able to get a second round pick for him. And obviously we saw where, the nice run Jimmy had in San Francisco.
Yeah, Jimmy won like 7 in a row to start, 5 in a row to start. Like it
5.
was 5 in a row. Yeah. Because I remember that was trade deadline was Halloween that year. I don't know. I remember that thing. I can't remember to eat breakfast, but I remember that. So yeah, Jimmy, that one worked out right. And that was a situation where Jimmy was not going to play unless Tom Brady got hurt in New England. And because they had a system of just drafting quarterbacks every year. Kevin O'Connell, they had drafted back in the day, I believe.
Jacoby Brissett.
And then they just typically, maybe that was their actual long-term plan, just to trade these guys and flip these guys when we had that opportunity. All right. That's it. Ran a little long, but that's okay, Debo. Episode 244 in the books. Thanks to my guy, Rand. Thanks to Debo for producing. Thanks to all you guys who watch, listen, and comment, and we'll catch you in the next one.